All right, buckle up, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into the world of Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, we're tackling this fiery debate about whether Bitcoin has actually failed as money.
It's a question that just won't go away.
Right. And our source material today is this response article from Kiwi Bitcoin Guide, taking aim at a pretty critical piece by Damien Grant.
Ah, this should be interesting.
It definitely is. These are the kind of topics where opinions run strong, so we're here to help you sift through all the noise and get to the heart of the matter.
Sounds good to me.
So Damien Grant, right off the bat, claims Bitcoin has failed in its quest to become money.
Okay, I can see where he's coming from.
But Kiwi Bitcoin Guide comes back swinging with some pretty impressive stats.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
They point out that Bitcoin settled over $19 trillion in 2024,
Oh.
surpassing even Visa. It's officially the world's fifth largest base money, they say. But before we get too excited, can we break down what base money actually means in this context? It's not like I can walk into a store and pay for groceries with a stack of Bitcoins, right?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how Bitcoin differs from traditional forms of money.
Okay, I'm all ears.
So, when we talk about base money, we're usually referring to the underlying monetary base of an economy.
Okay,
In a traditional system, this is typically managed by central banks.
right. The Federal Reserve in the U.S., for example.
Exactly. And it includes things like physical currency and bank reserves.
Got it.
But with Bitcoin, the base money is determined by the total value of all Bitcoins in circulation,
Okay.
which is set by the network's code, not by any central authority.
So even though I can't hold a Bitcoin in my hand like a dollar bill, it's still considered money in this broader sense.
In a way, yeah.
But if it's not about spending it at the coffee shop, then what's Bitcoin actually doing? What's its purpose?
Well, think about the traditional functions of money. There are three main ones: medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value.
Okay, that makes sense.
And Bitcoin right now is excelling as a store of value.
So kind of like digital gold.
Some people see it that way.
Interesting.
It's also holding its own as a unit of account in some circles.
I guess with more companies and even some countries adopting Bitcoin, that makes sense.
Precisely.
But then there's that third function, medium of exchange,
Right, and that's where things get really interesting with Bitcoin.
because it's not quite there yet,
Well, it's growing as a medium of exchange.
like with the Lightning Network.
Exactly. That's a game changer for everyday transactions.
Okay, we definitely need to dive deeper into the Lightning Network later.
Absolutely.
But first, let's address another point Damien Grant brought up.
Okay, what's that?
He compares Bitcoin to the airplane game, that old pyramid scheme, where new investors essentially fund the earlier ones.
Oh, I see where he's going with this.
Yeah, he's essentially suggesting that Bitcoin is just a speculative bubble destined to collapse.
But I don't think that comparison really holds up.
Why not?
Well, for starters, the airplane game relies on a closed system with a central organizer controlling who gets in and who profits.
Okay.
Bitcoin, on the other hand, is open source, accessible to anyone.
So there's no central authority pulling the strings.
Exactly. Bitcoin's value comes from its decentralized network, the underlying technology securing it, and the growing number of people who actually find it useful.
So it's not just about new investors hoping to get rich quick.
Right. And Grant doesn't really offer much evidence to back up his claim of collective insanity driving Bitcoin's rise.
Yeah, it does feel a bit dismissive.
Especially when you consider the growing adoption we see from major companies and even countries.
That suggests they're taking it pretty seriously, right?
Absolutely. And ironically, Grant himself argues that a private company could create a better version of Bitcoin.
Which kind of contradicts his whole pyramid scheme argument, doesn't it?
Exactly. And it highlights one of Bitcoin's core strengths, decentralization.
Right, because with Bitcoin, no single entity can manipulate or censor it.
Unlike Facebook's failed Libra project, which ultimately remained under the control of a single company.
It's like comparing a community garden to a massive corporate farm.
I like that analogy.
They both produce food, but the ownership and control structures are fundamentally different.
And that makes you think about the level of trust we're willing to place in large institutions, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's about control. How much are we comfortable handing over?
And how vulnerable does that make us?
Speaking of vulnerability, Kiwi Bitcoin Guide brings up a fascinating example of Bitcoin's resilience.
What's that?
China's mining ban in 2021.
Ah, right. When they cracked down on Bitcoin mining.
Yep. Overnight, nearly 30% of Bitcoin's network capacity vanished.
That's a huge chunk of the network.
And yet, Bitcoin kept humming along, completely unfazed.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Can you imagine what would happen if 30% of Amazon's servers suddenly went offline?
It would be chaos.
Exactly. But Bitcoin just shrugged it off.
That's the beauty of decentralization.
It's designed to withstand shocks and disruptions.
Think about the CrowdStrike incident, where a single point of failure took down companies and disrupted travel worldwide.
Yeah, it was a mess.
Bitcoin, with its distributed network, is inherently more resilient to that kind of failure.
So this whole decentralization thing isn't just some abstract tech jargon.
It has real-world implications for Bitcoin's security and functionality.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light.
Good.
But let's be honest, Damien Grant isn't alone in finding Bitcoin a bit tricky to use.
True.
He talks about struggling to figure it out and needing a help desk just to make a transaction.
Well, it's true that Bitcoin had a steeper learning curve in its early days.
But things have changed, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember when we all fumbled with dial-up internet and those clunky first-generation cell phones?
I try to block those memories out.
I hear you. But the point is, technology evolves quickly.
And Bitcoin is no exception.
Exactly. Today, you have user-friendly Bitcoin wallets that are super easy to use.
Okay, that's good to know.
And the development of the Lightning Network has been a total game changer.
Okay, you keep mentioning the Lightning Network. Can you break it down for me? What makes it such a big deal?
Think of it as a second layer built on top of Bitcoin.
Okay.
It allows for super fast transactions with incredibly low fees, often just fractions of a penny.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It's like having digital pocket change that you can use online.
I like that analogy.
It opens up a whole world of microtransactions, like tipping your favorite content creators directly or paying for online articles without needing a subscription.
Wait, hold on. You're saying I could support content creators directly without those pesky platform fees?
That's the idea.
That's incredible. It sounds like the Lightning Network could be a game changer, not just for Bitcoin, but for the whole creator economy.
I think so too. It's about creating a more direct and efficient flow of value where creators are rewarded directly for their work.
It's a powerful concept, and definitely one we need to explore further.
I agree.
But Grant brings up another valid concern. Volatility?
Ah, yes. The dreaded price swings.
He argues that Bitcoin's price is just too wild for businesses to rely on.
Well, volatility is definitely a factor to consider.
Is it a deal breaker, though?
Not necessarily. Remember, Bitcoin is a relatively new asset class in a free market.
Okay.
Price fluctuations are to be expected, especially in the early stages.
So it's just growing pains.
In a way, yes. As adoption grows and the market matures, we can expect this volatility to decrease.
That makes sense.
But it's also worth asking ourselves, is the stability of fiat currency really all it's cracked up to be?
That's an interesting point. I guess we're so used to thinking of stability in terms of fiat currency, but maybe that's a limited perspective.
I think so.
After all, the value of fiat currency is constantly being eroded by inflation.
Exactly.
It's like we're conditioned to accept that steadily rising prices are just a fact of life, when in reality, it's a result of the way our current system operates.
It makes you wonder if our perception of stability needs an update.
Maybe so.
Bitcoin, with its fixed supply, offers a different kind of stability.
Like a hedge against the debasement of traditional money.
Exactly. It's not about eliminating price fluctuations entirely, but about providing a predictable and transparent monetary system that can't be manipulated by governments or central banks.
So it's not necessarily about achieving perfect price stability, but about shifting the control of money away from those centralized institutions and back to the individual.
You got it. And that idea of individual empowerment is a recurring theme we see in the Bitcoin space.
It's interesting how Bitcoin seems to touch on these bigger philosophical questions about freedom and control.
Absolutely. Bitcoin embodies a philosophy of individual sovereignty and financial freedom.
It's about giving people more control over their own money, their own economic destiny.
And that resonates with a lot of people who are disillusioned with the current system.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. Bitcoin is clearly more than just a digital currency.
It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about money and value.
But if it's so revolutionary, why hasn't it taken over the world yet?
Well, it's still relatively early in the game,
No.
and Grant ends his piece predicting that a better alternative will eventually come along and dethrone Bitcoin.
Is that a real possibility? I mean, is there a Bitcoin killer lurking out there somewhere?
It's certainly possible that new cryptocurrencies with innovative features will emerge.
I could see that happening.
But let's not underestimate Bitcoin's first mover advantage.
Right. It's been around for over a decade now.
It has the longest track record, the strongest security, and brand recognition that's unmatched in the crypto space.
It almost feels like trying to invent a better internet or a better electricity.
I get that feeling too. Bitcoin feels like a similar foundational innovation.
Instead of transporting data or energy, it's transporting value.
And that's a pretty powerful concept, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, I'm curious to hear more about these real-world applications Kiwi Bitcoin Guide mentioned.
Oh yeah, let's get into those.
How are people actually using Bitcoin today, and what does the future hold?
Well, that's where things get really exciting. But we've covered a lot of ground already. Let's take a quick pause and come back refreshed to dive into those fascinating details.
Sounds like a plan. So before the break, we were just starting to get into real-world examples of how people are using Bitcoin today, and I, for one, am ready to hear more.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Kiwi Bitcoin Guide mentioned using Bitcoin for everyday purchases, like at cafes and stuff,
Yeah.
which Damien Grant seemed to find almost laughable.
Well, yeah, Grant was painting this picture of needing a week of training just to figure out how to make a simple transaction.
Right, like you'd need a help desk standing by.
I think his experience might be a bit outdated, to be honest.
Outdated.
Yeah, Bitcoin did have a steeper learning curve back in the day, but things have changed dramatically.
Okay, so less about Bitcoin being inherently complex and more about familiarity and maybe some resistance to new technology.
Exactly. And user-friendly wallets are everywhere now. Plus, there's the Lightning Network, which we've talked about. It's completely changed the game for everyday transactions.
Ah, the Lightning Network, our digital pocket change. I love that analogy, but gotta be honest, I'm still a bit fuzzy on how it actually works.
It's like, imagine you and a friend are constantly sending small amounts of Bitcoin back and forth.
Yeah.
Instead of broadcasting each tiny transaction to the entire Bitcoin network, you open a direct payment channel just between the two of you.
Kind of like opening a tab at a bar.
Exactly. You can make tons of payments within that channel, and only the final balance gets recorded on the main Bitcoin blockchain.
So it's like a mini Bitcoin network off the main one, just for those small, frequent transactions.
You got it. This makes transactions almost instant and practically free, which opens up this whole new world of possibilities for micropayments.
Micropayments, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
But Grant kept going back to this idea that widespread adoption is crucial for any currency to be successful.
Right. He argued that a better Bitcoin would need to be readily accepted everywhere.
But isn't that already happening with Bitcoin? At least to some extent.
That's the irony. Bitcoin is already accepted by millions of people and businesses globally. Remember, Kiwi Bitcoin Guide mentioned that website, btcmap.org.
The one that tracks Bitcoin merchants worldwide.
Yep, exactly. It shows that adoption is happening organically, even if it's not always making headlines.
So it's more than just tech enthusiasts now, like regular businesses are actually using Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Cafes, restaurants, even medical professionals are accepting Bitcoin.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. I guess I haven't paid close enough attention.
And remember, one of Bitcoin's key features is that it's permissionless. Anyone can join the network and make transactions without needing a bank or government approval.
That's huge. It completely levels the playing field.
And that's something traditional financial systems just can't offer.
Okay, so back to Grant's criteria for this so-called Bitcoin killer. He says it needs to be stable and predictable for businesses to actually use it.
Right, he really hammered on that volatility point.
Yeah, like Bitcoin's price swings were a deal breaker for him.
But isn't there an argument that Bitcoin's fixed supply is a form of stability in itself?
You mean because it can't be inflated away like our lovely fiat currency?
Exactly. When we say stability, we really need to define what we mean. We've gotten so used to the idea that inflation just constantly eats away at our purchasing power.
It's like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? You don't really see it happening, but the impact is definitely real.
Precisely. With Bitcoin, you have a limited supply, 21 million coins. That's it.
So no matter what central banks do, they can't just print more Bitcoin whenever they want.
Exactly. So the system itself is predictable and transparent, even if the price does fluctuate.
I see. So it's not about eliminating volatility entirely. It's more about having a different kind of stability.
A system that can't be manipulated.
And that shifts control away from centralized institutions.
And then back to the individual. Exactly. This idea of individual control, of being your own bank, that's a huge part of the appeal of Bitcoin.
So it's less about replacing the dollar bill with Bitcoin and more about having options, having more control over your own financial life.
That's a great way to put it.
It's all very exciting stuff, but there's a part of me that wonders, Is it all a bit too idealistic? Like, is this vision of a decentralized Bitcoin-powered world actually achievable?
Well, that's a question worth asking.
Or are we going to end up with governments and corporations just co-opting this technology and using it for their own purposes?
That's a risk with anything new, especially something that challenges existing power structures.
So how do we prevent that?
Well, that's where Bitcoin's decentralized nature comes into play again. It's designed to be resistant to that kind of control. No single entity can truly own or control Bitcoin.
I guess it's like trying to capture the internet itself.
Yeah, good analogy. It's too distributed, too resilient to be easily captured or controlled by any one group.
That's reassuring. So even if Bitcoin doesn't become this all-encompassing global currency, it's at least forcing us to ask some tough questions and rethink the way we do things.
Exactly. It's exposing the flaws in our current systems and encouraging us to imagine alternatives.
Whether Bitcoin succeeds or fails, it's already having a huge impact on how we think about money and value.
I completely agree. It's become a movement, a philosophy, a global experiment that's pushing us to reimagine the very foundation of our financial systems.
And that's pretty exciting stuff, even if it is a bit daunting.
I'm with you on that.
Speaking of exciting, I want to hear more about those real-world applications we touched on earlier. Kiwi Bitcoin Guide was talking about platforms like Fountain.fm and Waiheke, where users can support content creators directly using Bitcoin micropayments. What's the deal with those?
Those platforms are really fascinating. They represent a major shift in the creator economy. Imagine a world where artists, musicians, podcasters, anyone who creates content can earn directly from their audience without needing those middlemen taking a cut.
Wait, hold on. You're saying creators could actually make a living without relying on platforms that take a huge chunk of their earnings?
That's the idea. Platforms like Fountain.fm and Waiheke make it possible for fans to send tiny amounts of Bitcoin, like Satoshis, directly to creators while they're consuming content.
So it's like a virtual tip jar. But instead of fumbling with credit cards or paying those ridiculous platform fees, it's instant and seamless thanks to the Lightning Network.
Exactly. And it could be a total game changer for creators who are barely scraping by in this current attention economy.
It's like cutting out all those middlemen and letting value flow directly between fans and the people they want to support.
And it's not just about tipping for content either. Micropayments could revolutionize how we pay for online articles, access premium content, even play games. There are so many possibilities.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We're talking about a whole new world of microtransactions, where value flows freely between individuals without needing gatekeepers or intermediaries.
And that shift in power, from institutions to individuals, that's what Bitcoin is all about.
It's a pretty radical change from how we're used to doing things.
It is radical, but that's what makes it so exciting. Bitcoin is challenging us to completely rethink our relationship with money and value.
And to explore new models of economic interaction.
Exactly.
Speaking of new models, remember when Kiwi Bitcoin Guide mentioned Nostr?
Ah, yes, the decentralized Twitter.
Right. They were describing sending Bitcoin micropayments back and forth instantly and without any fees.
Nostra is a fascinating example of how Bitcoin can power new forms of online interaction.
So instead of relying on platforms like Twitter, where one company controls everything, Nostr is completely decentralized.
Exactly. It's based on a protocol that allows users to publish and subscribe to content without needing a central server.
So there's no single point of failure, no central authority that can censor or manipulate content.
And the Bitcoin integration takes it to another level. You can send those micropayments directly to other users, rewarding them for their contributions or for providing valuable content.
So it's like a social network and a payment system all rolled into one.
And all powered by Bitcoin.
It's almost too much to take in. Like, we're really talking about building a whole new internet, a whole new way of interacting and exchanging value online.
It's a vision of the future that's both exciting and a bit daunting.
It makes you wonder if we're getting ahead of ourselves, you know? Is all of this truly possible? Or is this Bitcoin-powered utopia just a pipe dream?
That's the million-dollar question, and honestly, I don't think anyone has a definitive answer yet.
It's all so new, so uncharted.
But that's part of what makes it so captivating. We're witnessing something truly new being born, something with the potential to change the world in ways we can barely imagine.
Whether that change is ultimately positive or negative, well, that's a whole other discussion.
But one thing is certain, the future of money is being written right now, and we're all playing a part in shaping it.
And that's a pretty incredible thought, even if it is a little terrifying.
I'm right there with you.
But before we get too lost in the future, I think it would be interesting to step back and explore some of the deeper philosophical ideas behind this whole Bitcoin movement.
Oh yeah, I'm all for that.
What are the core values driving its adoption? And how do those values challenge the dominant ideologies of our current financial system?
Sounds like a perfect topic to tackle after a quick break.
Let's do it. Welcome back, everyone. We've been on quite a ride exploring this Bitcoin debate, and it's clear this goes way beyond just tech specs and price charts.
It really gets you thinking about the bigger picture, doesn't it? The whole structure of our society.
It does. And like we were saying before the break, the Bitcoin conversation often veers into straight-up philosophy. It forces us to examine those deep-seated beliefs we have about money, trust, even power.
Yeah, you start to question things you never even thought about before, like what is money, really?
Right. And who gets to decide what it is and how it works?
Exactly. And Kiwi Bitcoin Guide makes a really interesting point about this when they question Damien Grant's libertarian label.
Oh, yeah. They basically called him out for relying on government-backed systems, which seems a bit contradictory, right?
It definitely highlights a tension within libertarian thought itself.
Like, how much authority is acceptable in a supposedly free society?
Exactly. Bitcoin, by its very nature, throws a wrench into traditional political and economic frameworks.
Because it doesn't need a government or central bank to function.
Right. It operates independently, governed by math and code instead of human institutions.
That's a pretty radical concept when you think about it.
It makes you wonder if maybe we've been looking at the whole idea of authority and control the wrong way.
Okay, so let's go full sci-fi for a moment. Imagine this crazy Bitcoin experiment actually works, like it goes mainstream, widespread adoption, the whole 9 yards. What kind of world are we looking at?
Ooh, that's a fun thought experiment. I'm picturing a world where individuals have way more control over their own finances.
Like true financial freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Where geographic borders become almost irrelevant to economic activity.
Wow, a truly global economy powered by this decentralized network.
And where money itself is resistant to censorship, so governments and corporations can't just shut people out of the system.
It sounds almost utopian, but also a little scary, you know?
Yeah.
Could a system like that actually be stable? What about the potential for things to go wrong?
Those are important questions. And to be honest, I don't think anyone has all the answers yet. Any system, whether it's centralized or decentralized, has risks.
That's true. There's no such thing as a perfect system.
The key is understanding and mitigating those risks. And one of the things that excites me about Bitcoin is that it's constantly evolving and adapting.
Because it's open source, right?
Yeah.
So anyone can contribute to its development.
Exactly. The community itself is constantly working to identify and address potential problems. It's like this global collaborative experiment.
So it's not just about the technology. It's about the people using it and shaping it.
Exactly. But there's always that question lurking in the back of my mind about whether powerful institutions, governments and corporations will try to co-opt Bitcoin for their own ends.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that too. Like, what's to stop them from trying to control this technology, to bend it to their will?
Well, Bitcoin's decentralized nature makes that incredibly difficult.
Because there's no single point of control.
Right. No one entity can just take over Bitcoin. It's like trying to grab hold of the internet itself. It's just too distributed and too resilient.
So even if the powers that be try to co-opt Bitcoin, there's a good chance they'll fail.
I think the odds are definitely in Bitcoin's favor. And even if Bitcoin doesn't achieve some kind of global domination, it's already forcing us to have these crucial conversations about the systems we've taken for granted.
Like shining a spotlight on the flaws in our current ways of doing things.
Exactly. It's making us question those assumptions about how money works, how power is distributed, and whether there might be a better way.
Whether or not Bitcoin succeeds in the traditional sense, it's already having a massive impact on how we think about the world.
I completely agree. It's gone way beyond being just a technology. It's become this movement, this philosophy, this global experiment that's pushing us to imagine a radically different future.
A future where power is more evenly distributed, where individuals have more control over their own lives.
Exactly. And whether we ultimately end up living in a Bitcoin-powered world or not, those ideas are already changing the world for the better.
Well, listeners, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of Bitcoin. We've explored the arguments, the technical details, the philosophical implications. I don't know about you, but my brain is officially fried.
Mine too. But in a good way, I hope.
Definitely in a good way. It's been an incredible journey, and we hope you found it as thought-provoking as we have.
As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep forming your own conclusions.
Don't just take our word for it. Do your own research. Dive down those rabbit holes and see where you end up.
The future is being written right now, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
And on that note, we'll leave you with one final thought from Kiwi Bitcoin Guide. What if Bitcoin represents more than just a new technology? What if it's a fundamental shift in how we think about value in a digital age? What would that future look like? Until next time, keep those brain gears turning.